Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. I don't know if you've ever thought of it or not, but when you got saved, He's in here. The God of the universe is dwelling inside of here. The God who created all that you see and all beyond that we can't see lives in here. God created all those things inside of us that they still haven't figured out how they work yet. He lives in here. And yes, there's freedom if we want it. And most of the time we do. The hard part is, learning how to trust Him to do that. I mean, we've been raised in a society where you push a button and things happen, and it don't work like that in the kingdom. Took a long time to get here, and God's not in a hurry about much. He said, Abraham, you're going to be the father of nations. He gave him one son when he was 100 years old. Well, then he made that promise to Isaac. Isaac's going to be the father of nations. Well, he did a little better. He had two. And we're going to kind of talk about those two tonight. Tale of two brothers. And we'll get there in a minute. Tonight we're going to be talking about amends. Principle 6 says, evaluate all my relationships, offer forgiveness to those who have hurt me, and make amends for harm I have done to others, except when to do so would harm them or others. And the verses for that are, happy are the merciful, happy are the peacemakers, Matthew 5, 7, and 9. Step 8 is the step being addressed. We have made a list of all persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, Luke 6:31. The story of Jacob and Esau, if you're not familiar with it, begins in Genesis 25. And Abraham in Genesis 24 had sent his servant to the country where Laban and Nahor and all those guys lived, his brothers. And from there, his servant brought back Rebekah. And Rebekah was the brother, or the granddaughter, well, I don't remember. Anyway, he brought her back, and she became Isaac's wife. When Isaac was, I believe it was 60 years old, they had the twins, Esau and Jacob. Rebekah was promised, or she was told, well, they were both told probably from the Lord, that the older would serve the younger. And when they were born, Esau was born first, and when he came out, Jacob was holding his foot. And so he got the name Jacob, or trickster, or supplanter. And that's kind of the way his life was for many, many years. When they were growing up, Esau was the hunter, he was the warrior, man of the field, the hunter and so on. Jacob was more the shepherd, stayed around the house, and the way it worked out, Esau kind of became daddy's boy, and Jacob kind of became mama's boy, not in today's terms of a mama's boy, but still, that's kind of the way it was. They had their favorites. And one day, Esau came in, he was famished, and Jacob was making some good old stew, and Esau told him, he said, man, I'm about to die of hunger. Can I have some of that? And he said, well, I'll tell you what, you give me your birthright. And Esau, what do I care about that birthright? Man, I'm starving to death. Yeah, give me some stew, you have my birthright. So the Bible says that he despised his birthright. And that was in Genesis 25. And later on in Genesis 27, kind of the same thing takes place in a way. They're a lot older by this time. Esau had married a couple of Canaanite women, and that had kind of displeased both his dad and mom. And Isaac was now about 100 years old. He was blind. He couldn't see very well at all. And I guess if you're blind, you can't see very well at all. But anyway, he couldn't. And he decided that it's time to, do the blessing. And a lot of that had to do with the inheritance, and what all was his was now going to be passed down, he thought, to his firstborn. Well, Rebecca got wind of this, and she, tells Jacob, he said, "I'll tell you what, this really doesn't need to happen. I mean, so far Esau's proven pretty irresponsible, so, we're not going to." Anyway, she talks Jacob into putting on some wool and getting his arms hairy and making the back of his neck hairy and putting a scent on him so he smells like Esau, and kind of tries to disguise his voice a little bit so he sounds like Esau, fixes up the meal that Esau loves to make for his dad. And Isaac had already sent Esau out to kill some game and to come back and fix him his favorite meal so that he could bless him and he could bestow upon him, the inheritance. And so Jacob goes in and does this quickly, or does this before Esau gets back, all at the bidding of his mother and with his mother's help. And so when he goes in, Isaac kind of thinks something's up because something's not working. Boy, you got back awful early, but wow, you smell like Esau. And he felt of his arms and his neck. You feel like Esau. Your voice really sounds kind of like Jacob's, but And so he ends up deceiving him and fools him. And Isaac pronounces the blessing on him. Jacob leaves, and it's pretty quick thereafter. Esau gets back with the game, fixes him his favorite meal, and they figure out that, hey, Jacob, got me again. And he says, listen, Dad's not going to be around much longer, and when he goes, I'm going to kill Jacob. And Rebecca gets wind of this and decides to send Jacob off to her brother's house in Haran, many, many miles away, to live there until Esau cools down. And so Jacob goes and he spends 20 years there. Now he knew that Esau was upset. He knew Esau was upset, and he was not in any hurry to get back. He was just not in any hurry. So while he's there, he has two wives who are sisters, two concubines who were servants of those two wives, and between the four of those women, he has 12 sons and a daughter. And these become the 12 tribes of Israel that you hear about. And finally, God speaks, to him. He says, it's time for you to go back to your country. And, Jacob, he's heard the voice of God once already in the ladder thing, where the angels are running up and down the ladder on his way to Laban. And God spoke to him there and basically gave him the same blessing that Abraham had given, had received. And so so now Jacob's going to go back. God says, it's time to go back. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to be with you. You're going to be a great father of a great name, and all the same promises. But Jacob, all he can think about, okay, God, I'm going to go because you're bigger than Esau. But he's still worried about Esau, So he goes back. And what we see Jacob doing, some commentators say that he was basically cooking up a bribe, he just was going to give Esau all kinds of stuff to appease him. But I think what Jacob was trying to do was make amends. I really do. I think he was trying to smooth things over. That's kind of what we do with amends. But we're taking care of our side of the fence, That's what amends is all about, just taking care of your part. Because they may not forgive. They may not make amends back, You don't know what's going to happen. The thing is, God expects us to take responsibility on our part for whatever that is. And so Jacob goes, and he's, trying to figure things out all the way there. Well, he sends his servants on ahead and say, tell Esau that I'm coming and so on. Well, they come back and said, yeah, Esau's coming. He's got 400 men with him. Jacob sends everybody across the river, and he spends the night by himself, over here. And God speaks to him again and wrestles with him during the night and all that, and just shows that he's God. And so when Jacob does go on across, I love what happens. I wrote that verse down somewhere. Anyway, I think it's 34:14. Shoot, done forgot it. Anyway, he tells when they finally meet, they embrace. I mean, Esau just grabs him, embraces him, and hugs him, and he just loves on him. And I'm sure Jacob's in disbelief. And then all of a sudden, Jacob starts saying, well, look, I brought all this to you. Esau says, I don't need it. Well, I've got all this for you. Well, I don't need it, man. I got it. Well, he said, here, let me accompany you as you come on in. This is what Esau's telling Jacob. Jacob said, no, we'll just kind of go along slow, and, you just go on ahead. The neat thing about that story is when you read the story of Jacob and Esau through those chapters, I remember the first few times I read it, I thought, Esau's a real jerk, But after I got to looking at Jacob, he's a real jerk too. But the thing is, Esau, and his mom was right. Rebecca told Jacob, he said, you go away for a while until your brother's, subsides, his anger subsides, and then you can come on back. Well, no telling when that happened, but Jacob stayed away 20 years. I mean, God had to get him to go back. And when he comes back, sure enough, his brother's anger has subsided. There was forgiveness there. And I think what we see there is something that we see a lot of times in our own lives. Assumed anger, We assume that things are bad that when we get there, And all that assumption just builds up within us. Next thing you know, the anxiety levels are high and so on. But when he got there, things were not what he thought they were going to be. Esau was full of forgiveness. Jacob was full of amends, And so from these two characters in the Bible, we see both of what this lesson is talking about, forgiveness and amends, in these two people. This week we're going to focus on Principle 6. In fact, we're going to spend the next 2 months on Principle 6, and that's how important it is to our recovery. We're going to look at an overview of Principle 6, which is about all about making amends. And basically, forgive me as I learned to forgive pretty well sums it up. We started doing repair work on the personal side of our lives weeks ago by admitting our powerlessness, turning our lives and wills over to God's care, doing our moral inventory, sharing our sins or wrongs with another, admitting our shortcomings and asking God to remove them. But now we begin to do some repair work on the relational side. So we did work on the personal side for all this time. Now we're going to start working on the relational side of our lives. Making our amends is the beginning of the end of your isolation from God and others. Still, some of us balk at making amends. We think, if God's forgiven me, isn't that enough? Now, I have thought that a billion times, in the past. I know that thought has entered my mind many times. Well, God's forgiven me. What in the world do I need to go and do something else about it? Well, that's the way an introvert operates. Whatever excuse you can find, not talk to people you're going to use. But people say that. Why should I drag up the past? After all, making amends, it doesn't sound natural. The answer to that objection is simple. Making amends is not about your past so much as it's about your future. Before you can have the healthy relationships you desire, you need to clean out the guilt shame, and pain that has caused many of your past relationships to fail. So, in the words of step 8, it is time to make a list of persons that we have harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. At this point in this lesson, you're only looking for the willingness. Step 8 only requires that we identify those to whom we need to make amends or offer forgiveness. Luke 6:31 reminds us to treat others the way that you want to be treated. For some of you, that may be very difficult. You've been hurt. You've been hurt very badly. You've been abused, maybe. Many of you had nothing to do with the wrong committed against you. As people are counseled on Principle 6 and on the critical importance of forgiveness, many will say, I'll never forgive. Not after what was done to me. In these cases, the wrong against the individual was often child molestation, sexual abuse, or adultery. Such sins are deep violations that leave painful wounds, but they are also the root of dysfunction that bring many people to recovery. Forgiving the perpetrator of such wrongs, even after the one harmed has dealt with emotional pain, seems impossible. We're going to deal specifically with this issue in the lesson on 3 types of forgiveness later on. So let's look at the second part of Principle 6. Make amends for harm I've done to others, except when to do so would harm them or others. Matthew 5:23 through 24 says, Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there at the altar and go be reconciled to your brother. Then come and offer your gift. The first part of Principle 6 deals with being willing to consider forgiveness. The second part of Principle 6 calls us to action as we actually make our amends and offer our forgiveness. Going back to that garden metaphor, we need to pull out the dead weeds in our past broken relationships so that we can clear a space where our new relationships can be successfully planted or restored. And that's why Principle 6 is so important. So much of recovery is a matter of replacing old habits with better ones. Replacing old hurts with new feelings, new ways of looking at things. And that's kind of what that little metaphor is about. In Participant Guide 3 on page 43, you will find an amends list. And if you haven't got there yet, there's a place in there. And it kind of goes along with book 2, but on page 43, in this amends list, on one side it says, I owe amends to, and so there you'll make a list of people. And then on the other side, I need to forgive, and there you'll make a list of people. And like I said, we're going to work on this for a couple of months, so it's not something that you just kind of do all in one day, but it may be something that you'll pray over and think over, over and over again over the next several weeks. Remember, all you're doing at this point is just writing them down. A couple of weeks we'll deal with the next lesson that actually talks about going and doing something. Amends. Let's look at the acrostic. A is to admit the hurt and the harm. The A stands for admit the hurt and the harm. Principle 4 showed us how important it is to open up to God and to others. Your feelings have been bottled up so far too long, and that has interfered with all your important relationships. In this step of your recovery, you need to once again face the hurts, resentments, and wrongs others have caused you or that you have caused others. Holding on to resentments not only blocks your recovery, it blocks God's forgiveness in your life. Luke 6:37 says, Do not judge others, and God will not judge you. Do not condemn others, and God will not condemn you. Forgive others, and God will forgive you. The next letter in amends is M. Stands for make a list. Make a list. In addition to the amends worksheet in Participant Guide 3, you will find the Celebrate Recovery Inventory in Guide 2 that we work through in Step 4, or that you will work through in Step 4 if you haven't done it yet. You can use these sheets to help you make your amends list. In column 1 on your inventory, you will find the list of people that you need to forgive. These are the people who have hurt you. In column 5, over on the right side, you'll find the list of people to whom you owe amends. These are the ones whom you have hurt. If it has been a while since you did your inventory, God may have revealed others to you that you need to add to your list. That is why it is important to start off with the amends worksheet, this one in book 3. When you're making your list, don't worry about the how-tos in making your amends. Don't ask questions like, well, how could I ever ask my dad for forgiveness? Or how could I ever forgive my brother for what he did? Go ahead and put the person on your list anyway. Treat others as you want them to treat you, Luke 6:31. Right now we're just putting them down there and being willing. The E in amends stands for encourage one another. It has been said that encouragement is oxygen to the soul. Before you make your amends or offer your forgiveness to others, meet with your accountability partner or sponsor, someone to encourage you and to provide a good sounding board. That person's objective opinion is valuable to ensure that you make amends and offer forgiveness with the right motives. Sometimes we make amends just to get the guilt off our back, and what you end up doing is you end up putting this load or this heavy burden on the other person and making matters worse than they were before. You feel better, but boy, they feel terrible, you know. So it's really important that you bounce these things off of somebody else, you know, before you actually go and take care of it. Hebrews 10:24 says, "Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds." If you're asked to be an encourager, an accountability partner, or sponsor, be honored. And remember, you can't hold a torch to light another's path without brightening your own. I like that. The N in amends is the reason for making the amends. And it stands for not for them. Not for them. You need to approach those to whom you're offering your forgiveness or amends humbly, honestly, sincerely, and willingly. Don't offer excuses or attempt to justify your actions. Just focus only on your part. In 5 words, there's the secret to making successful amends. Do not expect anything back. Do not expect anything back. You're just taking care of your side of the fence. You're making your amends, not for a reward, but for freedom from your hurts, hang-ups, and habits. Principle 6 says that I'm responsible to make amends for the harm I've done to others. Jesus said, love your enemies and do good to them. Lend and expect nothing back. God loves us generously and graciously, even when we are at our worst. God is kind. We need to be kind. Do you know that you can become addicted to your bitterness, your hatred, and revenge, just like you can become addicted to alcohol, drugs, and relationships? A life characterized by bitterness, resentment, and anger will kill you emotionally and shrivel your soul. They will produce what we call the 3 Ds: depression, despair, discouragement. An unforgiving heart will cause you more pain and destruction than it ever will cause the person who hurts you. You know, I know for years I had those kind of things. I had resentments and bitterness and towards the folks, and they were just living their life, didn't bother them a bit. You know, I was the only one being hurt by it. So, you know, we've got to learn how to release this. Let's move on to D. D stands for do it right. Do it at the right time. Do it at the right time. And we kind of talked about that already. This principle not only requires courage, good judgment, and willingness, but a careful sense of timing. Ecclesiastes 3:1 tells us that there's a right time for everything. There's a time to let things happen and a time to make things happen. There's a right time and a wrong time to offer forgiveness or to make amends. Before making amends, you need to pray, asking Jesus Christ for his guidance, his direction, and his perfect timing. Principle 6 goes on to say, except when to do so would harm them or others. Listen to Philippians 2:4. Each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. Don't wait until you feel like making your amends or offering your forgiveness. Living this principle takes an act of the will, or perhaps I should say a crisis of the will. Making your amends is an act of obedience to Scripture and of personal survival. The last letter in amends is S. Start living the promises of recovery. Start living the promises of recovery. As we complete this principle, we will discover God's gift of true freedom from our past. We will begin to find the peace and the serenity that we have long been seeking. We will become ready to embrace God's purposes for our lives. God promises, I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten. I like that one. Principle 6 offers you freedom. Freedom from the chains of resentment, anger, and hurt. Freedom through your amends for the harm you've caused to others. To look them in the eye, knowing that you are working with God and cleaning up your side of the street. I wanted to read you something from the Celebrate Recovery Bible. They have some really neat testimonies and so on in here, but they also have some, I'll just read this to you. It's a character study, and it says, my name is Esau.